The rain poured relentlessly, soaking her to the bone as she stood on the empty roadside, clutching a small battered suitcase in one hand and shielding her face with the other. Her hair clung to her cheeks, her clothes heavy with water, as if the elements were conspiring to weigh her down even more. She shivered, both from the cold and the suffocating realization of what had just happened. The rhythmic splatter of raindrops on the asphalt seemed to mock her silence. "How did it come to this?" she whispered to no one, her voice trembling. Her lips quivered, not just from the chill of the rain, but from the gnawing ache in her chest. A lump had formed in her throat, and no matter how hard she swallowed, it wouldn't go away. She looked down at the suitcase, her only possession now. Inside were just a few hurriedly packed clothes and the legal papers she refused to sign. She still couldn't believe he had done it. The man she had once believed would stand by her through everything had left her here, in the middle of nowhere, because she had said no. Wasn't marriage supposed to be about love, trust, and support? When had it turned into betrayal and manipulation? For weeks she had noticed the changes in him. The way he avoided her gaze during dinner, the half-hearted smiles, and the late-night phone calls he claimed were work-related. She tried to push her doubts aside, convincing herself that stress was to blame. But tonight the mask had slipped, revealing something she could no longer ignore. He had demanded she hand over her childhood home, the house her late parents had left her. At first, she thought it was just financial strain. Maybe they could talk it through. But the desperation in his eyes told a different story, one he wouldn't share. When she stood her ground, his anger boiled over, and in that moment, she saw a stranger. Now she stood alone, the roar of the rain drowning out her thoughts. What secrets was he hiding? Why had he turned against her so ruthlessly? Clutching the suitcase tighter, she took a shaky breath. She didn't know where the road would lead her, but she knew one thing: she couldn't turn back. The argument had begun innocently enough, as most do. They were sitting at the kitchen table, the familiar warmth of the house enveloping them, though the air between them was uncomfortably heavy. Her husband, Peter, had been fidgeting with a pen, his eyes darting to the stack of documents on the table. At first, he tried to sound calm, almost reasonable. "Anna, it's just a house. We could do so much more if you sold it. Or better yet, transferred it to someone who knows how to manage it," he said, leaning forward with what he probably thought was a persuasive smile. Anna felt her stomach twist. She knew that smile, the one that masked his frustration. Her fingers instinctively tightened around the mug of tea in her hands. "Peter, we've talked about this. It's not just a house to me. It was my parents' home. It's the only thing I have left of them." His smile vanished, replaced by an impatient frown. "Your parents' home? Anna, that house is sitting there unused, falling apart. What's the point of clinging to it? Think of the opportunities. Think of what we could do with the money, or what someone else could do with it." She placed the mug down carefully, her voice calm but firm. "I'm not selling it, and I'm certainly not handing it over to anyone. Why are you pushing this so hard, Peter? Who even is this person you're talking about?" His jaw clenched, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand, Anna. This isn't just about us. I made commitments." "Commitments?" she echoed, her voice rising. "What commitments? To whom?" He slammed his hands on the table, startling her. "I don't have to explain everything to you. You're being stubborn and selfish." Anna rose to her feet, her heart pounding. "Selfish? You're asking me to give up something that means everything to me? And I'm the selfish one? Tell me the truth, Peter. What's going on?" But he didn't answer. Instead, his silence stretched, the tension thick and suffocating. And in that silence, Anna realized the truth. Peter wasn't the man she thought he was. Peter's desperation had become impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the argument over the house. It was the little things that had been building up over the past few weeks. Anna had noticed the changes in him, subtle at first but now glaringly obvious. He was distracted all the time, his phone buzzing late at night with calls he dismissed far too quickly. She would catch him pacing in the living room long after she'd gone to bed, muttering under his breath, Once, she'd even seen him sitting at the table, staring at nothing, his face etched with worry. When she asked him what was wrong, he brushed her off with a forced laugh. "Just work stuff," he'd said, but his eyes betrayed him. There was something deeper. Then there were the odd conversations she overheard. Peter would step outside to take calls, but sometimes he wasn't far enough away for her not to hear the tension in his voice. Words like deadline and consequences floated through the open window, accompanied by the tone of a man trying to bargain his way out of trouble. It all came to a head one evening when she found an unfamiliar envelope on his desk. She wasn't proud of opening it, but her curiosity had been gnawing at her for days. Inside, there was a typed letter that made her stomach drop. Final warning. The agreed terms must be met or further action will be taken. You know what's at stake. No signature, no sender, just those cold, ominous words. When she confronted him about it, Peter's reaction only deepened her suspicions. His face went pale, and his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You had no right to go through my thing," he snapped, snatching the letter from her. "I had every right, Peter," she shot back. "What's going on? Who sent that letter? Why are you pushing me to give up the house?" His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked trapped, cornered, like a man running out of excuses. Finally, he muttered, "It's complicated, Anna." "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me understand," she pleaded. "What are you hiding?" But instead of answering, he turned away. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he struggled to keep himself composed. It was as if he were carrying a secret so heavy it was breaking him. And in that moment, she realized the house wasn't just a house to him. It was the key to something far darker than she'd imagined. The house had always been more than just a structure to Anna. It was the heartbeat of her childhood, every creaking floorboard and peeling wallpaper holding stories of laughter, love, and even sorrow. But now, standing at the edge of the overgrown garden, she couldn't shake the strange feeling that there was more to it than she'd ever known. The argument with Peter had left her unsettled, not just because of his betrayal, but because of the questions it raised. Why was he so desperate for the house? Why did it matter so much to him or to whoever was pressuring him? Those questions refused to leave her alone. And then there were the memories, small fragments of conversations with her late parents, which now seemed laden with meaning she hadn't noticed before. She remembered her father once telling her, "This house is special, Anna. It's seen things. It holds things." At the time, she'd thought he was being sentimental, waxing poetic about the old home. But now his words echoed in her mind like a riddle. Determined to find answers, she spent hours going through the house, room by room, searching for something, anything, that might explain the mystery surrounding it. The attic, long abandoned and filled with dusty relics of the past, seemed like a good place to start. She climbed the rickety ladder, her flashlight casting long shadows on the wooden beams. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and mothballs, and every step sent puffs of dust swirling into the light. Boxes of forgotten trinkets, faded photographs, and brittle papers surrounded her, but none of it seemed unusual. It wasn't until she moved an old steamer trunk that she noticed something odd. Beneath it, the wooden floorboards were slightly uneven, as though they had been tampered with. Her pulse quickened as she knelt down and ran her fingers over the planks. One of them was loose. After a moment of prying, she managed to lift the board, revealing a small, hidden compartment. Inside was a metal box, rusted at the edges but surprisingly sturdy. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she unlatched it. What she found inside left her breathless. There were old documents, handwritten letters, and a small velvet pouch that jingled faintly when she picked it up. Opening the pouch, she found a set of strange, ornate keys. The letters spoke of a vault, one that her family had sworn to protect. The words were cryptic, hinting at something valuable or dangerous hidden within the property. Her mind raced. Was this what Peter had been after? Did he even know about the vault, or was he being manipulated by someone who did? The weight of the discovery pressed heavily on her, filling her with equal parts fear and determination. The house was no longer just her childhood home. It was a puzzle, and she was at the center of it. Whatever lay hidden in its depths, she knew it had the power to change everything. Anna's unease began the first time she met the man Peter called a family friend. His name was Marcus. though Peter avoided giving much more detail than that. They had bumped into him unexpectedly at a cafe a few weeks ago, and the way Peter introduced him was hurried, almost reluctant. "Anna, this is Marcus," Peter had said, his voice tight. "He's a friend of the family." Marcus had smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His handshake was firm, his grip lingering just a second too long. He was impeccably dressed, his tailored suit fitting perfectly, and he exuded an air of quiet authority. There was something about him, an edge to his politeness, as if every word he spoke was carefully calculated. "I've heard so much about you," Marcus said, his tone warm yet oddly formal. "Peter talks about you all the time. It's a pleasure to finally meet." Anna forced a polite smile, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His eyes, sharp and piercing, seemed to assess her, as if he were looking for something beneath the surface. She didn't know why, but his presence made her skin crawl. After that encounter, Marcus seemed to pop up more frequently. He would visit their house unannounced, always just dropping by to see Peter. They would retreat into Peter's study, their hushed conversations filled with low murmurs and the occasional sharp word. When Anna asked Peter about it, he dismissed her concerns. "Marcus is just helping me with a few things," he said, brushing her off. "Nothing you need to worry about." But Anna couldn't ignore the tension that seemed to build every time Marcus was around. Once she caught Marcus looking at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention. His gaze lingered on her, cold and calculating, and when their eyes met, he offered a smile that sent a shiver down her spine. Then there was the incident in the garden. Anna had been tending to the roses when she overheard Marcus's voice drifting through the open study window. "She doesn't need to know anything," he was saying, his tone firm. "Keep her out of it. Just make sure you get it done." She froze, her heart pounding. Who was this man, and what did he mean by "keep her out of it"? The cryptic nature of his words only deepened her suspicions. Later, when she confronted Peter, he grew defensive, almost panicked. "You're overthinking it," he snapped. "Marcus is just a businessman. He's helping me deal with some financial stuff." But Anna didn't buy it. There was something more, something Peter wasn't telling her. And Marcus, this so-called family friend, wasn't who he seemed to be. The more she thought about it, the more Anna was certain that Marcus's interest in Peter and in the house wasn't coincidental. He was connected to the growing web of secrets around her, and she knew that uncovering the truth about him would be the key to understanding everything. The rain had stopped by the time Anna found temporary shelter under an old bus stop. The night was quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees, but her mind was far from peaceful. As she sat there, soaked and shivering, she couldn't stop thinking about the house. Its presence loomed in her memory not just as a home, but as a mystery she'd taken for granted her entire life. Her parents had adored that house. Her father used to say it was their safe haven, and her mother treated it as if it were sacred ground. Yet they rarely spoke about how it came into their possession. Anna had always assumed it was just an ordinary family inheritance, passed down like an heirloom. Now she wasn't so sure. She thought back to snippets of conversations she'd overheard as a child, hushed whispers between her parents when they thought she wasn't listening. Words like responsibility and protection stood out in her memory, but at the time, they'd meant nothing to her. Once she had even asked her mother why the attic was always locked. "It's just storage," her mother had replied, though her tone was clipped, and she refused to meet Anna's eyes. Then there was the peculiar story her father had told her when she was 7, about a distant relative who had built the house with a purpose. He described the man as eccentric, a recluse who rarely left the property. At the time, Anna had dismissed it as one of her father's bedtime tales, but now she wondered if there was more to it. As the hours ticked by, a pattern began to emerge in her memories. The house wasn't just a home, it was tied to something bigger, something her parents had never explained. Had they been trying to shield her from it? Or had they simply hoped she'd never have to confront it? And then there was the way Peter had behaved, the urgency in his voice when he demanded she hand over the house, the strange figure of Marcus lurking in the background, and the cryptic letter she had found. None of it made sense unless the house itself was the key to something significant. A new determination took hold of her. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Her parents had kept secrets, and Peter's betrayal had forced her to see what she had overlooked for years. Whatever legacy the house carried, it was hers now, and she had to uncover the truth. With trembling hands, she reached into her soaked suitcase and pulled out an old family photograph she had hastily packed before Peter left her stranded. In the picture, her parents stood in front of the house, smiling, but it wasn't their faces that caught her attention. It was the background. There, etched faintly above the front door, was a symbol she had never noticed before. A crest or emblem, weathered by time but unmistakably deliberate. Her breath caught in her throat. The house held answers, and for the first time in her life, Anna was ready to find them. The hum of an approaching car broke the eerie silence of the empty road. Anna, huddled under the dim light of the bus stop, flinched as the headlights washed over her. For a moment, her heart raced with fear. What if Peter had sent someone after her? But as the car slowed and pulled over, the driver's window rolled down to reveal a kind, weathered face framed by graying hair. "Are you all right, miss?" the stranger asked, concern etched into his voice. Anna hesitated, clutching her suitcase tighter. She was wary of trusting anyone after everything that had happened, but the warmth in his tone was disarming. I'm fine," she stammered, though her voice betrayed her exhaustion. "You don't look fine," the man replied gently. "It's late, and you're soaked to the bone. Please let me help you. There's a diner just a few miles down the road. At least come inside and dry off." Something in his eyes, a quiet sincerity, made her nod. "Thank you," she whispered, climbing into the passenger seat. The man introduced himself as Jack, a retired mechanic who lived nearby. He didn't press her for details, sensing she wasn't ready to talk, but he kept the conversation light as they drove. When they arrived at the diner, the warm glow of the neon sign felt like a small beacon of hope. Over a steaming cup of coffee, Anna finally let her guard down. She told Jack everything, about Peter, the argument, and the house. As she spoke, Jack listened intently, his brow furrowing. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "I don't mean to pry," he began carefully, "but your house, is it the old Benson place?" Anna's eyes widened. "Yes. How do you know that?" Jack sighed, his fingers tracing the edge of his coffee mug. "I grew up in this town. That house has always been the talk of the locals. People said your family kept to themselves, never letting anyone get too close. There were rumors about it, stories of secret tunnels, hidden rooms, and something valuable that people were always after. I never paid much attention to them, but maybe there was some truth to it after all." Anna's pulse quickened. "Do you know anything about a crest? There's one above the front door. I only just noticed it." Jack nodded slowly. "Yeah, I've seen it. It's old, older than the house itself. Some say it's connected to a group. People who used to deal in things they shouldn't have." Anna's breath hitched. "What kind of things?" Jack shrugged. "No one knows for sure, but if Peter and this Marcus fellow are as desperate as you say, it might not just be about money. You might be sitting on something a lot bigger than you realize." For the first time in days, Anna felt a glimmer of hope. Jack wasn't just a kind stranger. He might be the ally she desperately needed to uncover the truth. Peter sat alone in the dimly lit study, the weight of his decisions pressing down on him like a physical burden. The documents on the desk were a jumbled mess, legal papers, threatening letters, and scribbled notes that barely made sense anymore. He ran his hands through his hair, his heart pounding as the clock ticked louder than it should. He hadn't meant for things to spiral this far. When Marcus first approached him 6 months ago, Peter had thought it was a simple favor, a business deal that would be mutually beneficial. Marcus had been smooth-talking and persuasive, promising solutions to Peter's growing financial problems. But beneath the charm was a subtle menace that Peter hadn't recognized until it was too late. "This isn't just about you," Marcus had said during one of their first meetings. "You're not the only one with a stake in this. That house, it's more than property. It's a piece of history, and history has its debts." At the time, Peter didn't question it. He had been drowning in debt, his business on the brink of collapse, and Marcus offered a lifeline. All he had to do was convince Anna to sign over the house. It sounded simple, deceptively so. But as the weeks passed, the demands grew darker, the stakes higher. Marcus's calm demeanor shifted into cold insistence, and Peter began to understand that he wasn't dealing with a mere businessman. He tried to reason with Anna, hoping she'd agree without needing to know the details, but her stubborn refusal had thrown everything into chaos. Peter knew she wouldn't cave, not without an explanation. And the truth. The truth was something he couldn't bring himself to tell her, because Marcus wasn't just after the house. He was after what was hidden within it. Peter had stumbled upon the secret by accident not long after they were married. An old letter tucked away in the attic, cryptic but clear enough to suggest that Anna's family had been safeguarding something for generations. Something valuable, dangerous, or both. He hadn't thought much of it at the time, chalking it up to family folklore. But Marcus knew. Somehow he knew. Now Peter was trapped. Marcus had made it clear, if Peter didn't deliver, the consequences wouldn't just fall on him. Anna's safety was at risk, and while Peter hated himself for his betrayal, he couldn't see another way out. As he stared at the documents, his phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Marcus. "Time's running out. Don't make me come back there." Peter's stomach churned. He had thought he could handle this, but every choice seemed to lead him deeper into a pit he couldn't climb out of. He didn't want to hurt Anna. He still loved her. But love didn't matter when survival was on the line. For the first time in his life, Peter realized what it meant to be truly powerless. And as much as he wanted to protect Anna, he couldn't shake the fear that she might be the one who ended up saving him. Anna sat cross-legged on the motel room floor, her suitcase splayed open before her. The faint hum of the flickering neon sign outside was the only sound, a sharp contrast to the chaos swirling in her mind. She had packed hastily, grabbing only essentials and a few sentimental items, never imagining she'd be rifling through them in search of answers to questions she didn't fully understand. Her fingers brushed over her old journal, a worn leather-bound book that had once been her confidant during turbulent times. She set it aside, pulling out a small wooden box she hadn't opened in years. Inside were keepsakes, a pressed flower from her wedding bouquet, her father's pocket watch, and tucked beneath it, a photograph she didn't recognize. Her breath caught as she studied the image. It was faded, its edges frayed, but the faces were clear. Her parents stood in front of the house, younger than she'd ever seen them. Their smiles bright, but their postures stiff, as if they were posing out of obligation rather than joy. Behind them, the house loomed, its ornate crest visible just above the front door. But it wasn't the photo itself that unnerved her. It was what was written on the back. The words were in her father's handwriting, the letters sharp and hurried. "Protect what's ours. They'll come for it someday." Anna stared at the note, her mind racing. What did he mean by they? And what was it? Her father had always been a cautious man, but he'd never spoken in riddles like this. The cryptic warning felt like a message from beyond the grave, a puzzle left for her to unravel. She turned the photo over again, scrutinizing every detail. That's when she noticed something she'd overlooked, a shadowy figure in the far corner of the frame, barely visible near the edge of the house. It wasn't someone she recognized, and the sight of it sent a chill down her spine. Whoever it was, they were watching. Heart pounding, Anna rummaged deeper into the box, hoping for more clues. Beneath the pocket watch, she found a small brass key, its surface tarnished with age. She'd never seen it before, but it felt significant, as if it had been waiting for her to find it. Could this key unlock the secrets of her family's home, or was it tied to something even more sinister? As she turned it over in her hands, memories began to surface. Her father's sudden silences when asked about the house's history, her mother's anxious glances whenever they entertained guests, and the attic that was always locked, no matter how many times Anna had begged to see what was inside. The pieces were starting to come together, but they only formed more questions. Her father's warning, the photograph, the key, they all pointed to one undeniable truth. The house was more than a home. It was a vault of secrets, and someone had been watching it for a long time. Anna felt a mix of fear and determination. Whatever her parents had protected, it was now hers to uncover. But as she tucked the key into her pocket, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers would come at a cost. The night was thick with tension as Anna stood at the threshold of the house. The place that had once felt like home but now seemed like the setting of a dark and twisted puzzle. The key she had found in the old wooden box burned a hole in her pocket, its presence both comforting and foreboding. It was time. Time to confront the truth about the house, about Peter, and about everything she had once believed. The house was eerily quiet as she stepped inside, the familiar creaks of the floorboards now sounding like ominous whispers. She moved through the rooms, her heart racing, the walls closing in with each step. The attic, the one place she had never been allowed to explore, beckoned her now. The locked door was exactly where she remembered it, but with the key in her hand, there was no barrier left. She inserted the key with trembling hands, and the door creaked open, revealing a dusty, forgotten world. Old furniture, cobwebs, and boxes filled with the remnants of a life that once was. But as Anna searched through the piles, her eyes landed on a large, wooden chest tucked away in the far corner. She approached it slowly, a sense of dread settling in her stomach. Inside, the chest was filled with papers, letters, maps, and journals. But what caught Anna's eye were the photographs. Dozens of them, all of people she didn't recognize, standing outside the house, standing next to her parents, and some familiar faces of Peter and Marcus, decades younger. The photographs were haunting, their eyes cold and calculating. As Anna sifted through the images, she found a letter at the bottom of the chest. It was her father's handwriting, but it was different, erratic, as if he had written it under duress. "They are watching. They will stop at nothing. The house must be kept safe, Anna. It's not just property. It's the key to everything. If they find out, they'll take it all. Don't trust Peter. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you before. Protect yourself. Protect the house." Her mind spun as she absorbed the weight of his words. What had her parents been guarding all these years? What had they known about Peter's connections? About Marcus and the men in those photographs? The house wasn't just a home. It was a hidden vault for something far more dangerous. And then it hit her. Peter had known. He had known all along. The desperation in his eyes, his frantic need for her to give up the house, his secrecy. It all made sense now. Marcus wasn't just a friend. He was part of something much darker, something her father had warned her about. Anna felt a surge of rage and betrayal flood through her. Peter had lied to her, manipulated her, and pushed her into a corner, all for something that had nothing to do with their life together. It was about power, control, and a legacy she hadn't even known existed. When Peter finally appeared at the door, his face drawn with guilt, Anna's resolve hardened. "You knew, didn't you?" she asked, her voice low but steady. "You knew what this house really was." Peter's face faltered, and for a moment, Anna saw the man she once loved, the man who had promised to protect her. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "I did it for us," he whispered, voice shaking. "I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this." Anna looked at him, torn between the love she had for the man she had married and the raw reality of his betrayal. She had a choice: forgive him and try to rebuild what they had, or walk away from everything. Her decision was swift. She couldn't trust him anymore. The lies, the secrecy, the danger he had exposed her to. It was too much. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the house. As she stepped into the night, leaving behind the crumbling foundation of her past, she knew one thing: she would protect the house, not because of what it held, but because of what it had cost her to uncover the truth.